Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Open Inquiry podcast. My name is Danylo Zubaryev. So this is another solo episode in which I'll reflect on a topic by myself. There's no guest. I've now released 2 such episodes. The first was on the fear of death and the second on anger. And in these episodes, I attempt to examine these universal psychological experiences, breaking them down in some detail and describing my own ideas on how to work with the associated emotions. Today's topic is memory. This mysterious cognitive function of ours that's so fundamental to our understanding of ourselves and of the world that it can lead to very difficult emotional experiences. Broadly, I find that there are 2 ways that discussing memory can be beneficial. A, reflecting on the transience and unreliability of memory, and B, exploring emotional memories. Personally, I found that some of the most difficult and confusing emotional experiences of my life were sparked by reflections on specific memories from my life and certain characteristics of my memories. To start this episode, I'll discuss the nature of memory itself, the wide variety in form and texture and clarity that memories seem to take, and I'll describe some interesting experiments that you can do at any moment to examine memory from your own perspective. After that, I'll explore the fundamental fragility and unreliability of memory. This reflection can be quite disturbing, but also very profound if engaged directly. And lastly, I'll discuss emotional memories, those ones that we tend to repress or ignore because it's easier to do so than to let the emotions hit us. I'll use a couple of my own emotional memories as examples when we reach this point in the podcast, and you might even hear me cry. Before I go into this, I want to clarify that I'm not a trained psychologist or therapist. I'm just going to be reflecting candidly about the nature of difficult emotional memories and speaking largely from personal experience here, offering ways to observe memory from the first-person perspective and try to gain some insights from that. And I think these sincere reflections can be very beneficial. But as usual, if you find any part of this episode difficult to listen to, don't hesitate to turn it off and come back later or not at all. It's perfectly reasonable if you feel that you're not comfortable with exploring the following subject matter. So to begin, it's worth reflecting on how beautiful and fascinating memories are. When you observe memories closely and observe how they arise, you're directly in contact with the fundamentally mysterious nature of the mind. This is true for all thoughts and all events in your mind, every feeling, sensation, idea, image. It's all just appearing magically. But the reason memory is particularly interesting is because it operates in 2 directions and you can actually play with it. It makes it especially obvious that the mind is a beautiful mystery. In one direction, sometimes a memory just pops up. Sometimes you weren't looking for it, but then some concept or phrase or obligation just appears, literally out of nowhere. Like, oh, I still need to buy eggs at the grocery store. Or an event from your past just pops up like the first time you lost a tooth. In psychology, these are sometimes called involuntary memories. It's so interesting that these seemingly random pieces of information can just manifest like that, without any choice on your part whatsoever. And yet the reverse direction, known as voluntary memories, can occur too. Sometimes you're actually seeking a memory out and then it slowly manifests into your conscious mind. Or it doesn't, and you've got that terribly frustrating tip of the tongue experience. Those of us who've been students have found ourselves in this strange circumstance over and over again when we're writing exams, for example. You're trying to remember that English term for action word, or the chemical composition of water, or how to multiply decimals. Sometimes the answer comes to mind, but sometimes it doesn't. And it can be incredibly frustrating, as it certainly was for me all throughout academia, when it refuses to appear. You know this information is in your mind somewhere, but you can't reach it. These moments of memory arising happen constantly in our daily lives. Just to provide a typical example here, I experienced a moment of this in my regular daily life recently when I was serving gelato at a gelato shop I work at. The customer ordered the flavors blueberry and mango, if I recall correctly. And I turned around to get a cone for him, and when I returned with the cone, I had forgotten the flavors. So then I stopped and asked myself, what were they again? And then they just appeared in my mind. In that brief moment, not even 10 seconds, I had known a piece of information, then thought about a whole bunch of other things. I think my mind went completely elsewhere while I was getting the cone. I don't remember the details of the thoughts. And then my mind was able to bring back that piece of information, blueberry mango. It just appeared when I needed it, when I stopped and thought. And I thought very briefly. It only took 1 second for the information to reappear. But sometimes you think very hard and a memory comes up. Sometimes you know something. You're like, I know this, and it's somewhere in this log of my brain, somewhere in these neural pathways and neurochemicals, there's this piece of information. Sometimes you just know that it's there, you can feel it, but you just can't remember it. What was the phone number again? What year was that movie released again? And you're thinking, and then it comes. You can actually feel the piece of information moving from some dark abyss of hidden knowledge into your conscious awareness. You can experiment with this a bit. For example, right now, try to remember a moment from your life before the age of 10. This might take you a moment, but as soon as a memory arises, maybe a memory from school, or playing with friends or family, or a birthday, it's worth asking yourself how it appeared. Did you choose that memory from a bank of memories, or did it choose itself? How clear is the memory? Is it just a vague image, or is it very precise and detailed? In either case, why is it imperfect? Why did you forget some components and remember others? Now you can also try something more specific. Right now, try to remember your credit card number. If you don't have a credit card, you can use something like a student number or your postal code, any series of numbers or letters. This could be easy or difficult for you, that doesn't matter, but take a moment to observe the information manifesting in your mind. Even if it doesn't appear in full, maybe you just remember a couple of letters or numbers. 5 seconds ago, it was not here, and now it's here. But where was it before? And where does it go when we move on and focus on other things? The scientifically inclined of us may be tempted to say that the information is simply resting in certain brain regions of ours, like the hippocampus, for example. But what does that even mean? How can a piece of information, like a sequence of numbers or an event from your childhood, just hang out amongst the neurons and chemicals and fluids of your brain? This explanation on some level is patently ridiculous and doesn't really explain anything. But it does tell us that our brains are involved in this truly miraculous and almost literally magical experience of consciousness. What does it mean to know something if you can't remember it exactly? How is it that we can feel some knowledge in our subconscious even if we fail to recall it? What is that feeling? How is it that we know it's there somewhere if we can't invoke it? How many of these hidden memories are lurking in our subconscious minds? And perhaps most importantly, how much of an effect do they have on who we are? Do we interpret everything we experience with reference to our hidden memories? As you try to remember something, your brain may be trying to fire neural pathways to invoke the piece of information, but the information is not a chemical or a neuron. It's somehow associated with these neural pathways, but then it's so much more than that. It's not like you can look at a neural pathway and say, oh, that's the number 342, or, oh, that neural pathway is the first time he lost a tooth. Every neural pathway is just a series of brain cells. Every human being's brain contains these neural pathways, but somehow they're distinct within our minds. Somehow, a neural pathway leads to this complex image with all of these different facets that's specific to you. At least that's how it feels. And that's another beautiful and fascinating thing about memories too, that they have a lot of different facets. Sometimes it involves touch, visuals, smells, sounds. Sometimes it's a verbal memory like a common expression or something someone said to you. And sometimes the memory invokes emotions that we can hardly understand, like nostalgia or longing. I'll go into more detail on this shortly. An important note as we reflect here on the character of memories and all the different facets they may or may not have is that they are fundamentally unreliable. We seem to define ourselves by our memories. We think of ourselves as existing in one moment in time with a past and a future, and we largely rely on these memories and anticipations to understand who we are. And yet memories are constantly changing and losing detail, forgotten one moment and then remembered the next, often in some other form. If you're not actively thinking about your interests, hobbies, and values, then how is it that you know who you are in any given moment? After all, memories are only appearing in the present moment. When you remember an event from your childhood or your credit card number, you're not actually traveling in time or space to access the information. Your brain is just, in this very present moment, pulling up an idea, a symbol of other times and spaces and facts. But when you're not pulling that information up, when you're just operating through daily life, in some sense you don't actually know anything. And you're never guaranteed that you'll be able to bring back the same information that you did before. Maybe you'll forget it, or it will shapeshift in your subconscious or blend with other information. I've recently encountered this insight very directly, and it was both scary and liberating. It starts with a question that comes to mind while I'm taking a walk. How much of this walk will I remember? If I'm completely honest with myself, my answer is none. Imagine you go for a walk down a straight path. At any moment along the walk, you ask yourself, how much do I remember of this walk so far? The scary, liberating truth is that your answer has to be none, or almost none, and quickly becoming none. You might look back at the path behind you and try to remember some of the details from moments ago. You might remember noticing a tree at one point, maybe a certain animal came by. Maybe you remember the route. But this is not the same as remembering every single moment along the walk. Consider every detail you forgot or failed to notice. All of them are gone. Even the memories you formed are actively losing details. They're just your mind's constructed representations of things that have happened, mere symbols. Realizing all of this, you're left with one fact. The only reality is the present moment, and it's constantly disappearing. This question can take other forms like, how likely am I to remember the present moment? You can ask yourself this anytime. If you honestly face this, you might realize that the likelihood is far smaller than you previously assumed, maybe something like 0.00001%. You might ask the question, what percentage of my life do I remember now? Again, the answer is probably much lower than your instincts suggest. Another related question might arise, how accurate are my memories? And once again, the answer is much less than we tacitly assume. Truthfully, you might remember 0.00001% of your life, and those memories might accurately contain 0.0001% of the details. On top of all this, a big portion of your memories will be false ones. Was I actually at that event, or did I just hear about it? Was my best friend there? Whose house was that at again? Was this memory just a dream? These are questions about major details of your experiences, and you will find yourself asking them and often failing to find the answers, filling them in with blind guesses. It seems that we operate on a bizarre false expectation that we'll remember large portions of our lives, and we live to create those memories. These scary, liberating questions put the truth front and center. The only thing that's real is right now, and it's all you have. In fact, it may be all you are, fundamentally. At every moment, your experience is rich with marvelous detail that you habitually neglect. These details will almost never be remembered. They are immediately lost. And the tiny pieces that are turned into memories immediately begin to decay and at one point or another vanish from your brain. This insight has struck me about 5 times in my life, and each time made me feel small, alone, and lost. But I'm beginning to realize that there's no good reason for this to be scary. It's the simple truth of everyone's experience. It's what we're all going through. In fact, it inherently presents us with an opportunity to be completely present. In understanding this, you can, at least for a brief moment, stop unconsciously grasping at the mirages of past and future and genuinely cherish the fleeting reality of this present moment. Instead of worrying about losing track of your memories or not knowing what the future holds, you can use these observations of memory as a means to appreciate and relax into this present moment, which is reliable and always here. Okay, before jumping into this last emotional section of the episode, let me clarify the 2 overall points I've made so far. The first is that memory is a uniquely interesting form of mental activity that demonstrates the mysterious nature of our minds. You can use any memory as an opportunity to notice this. The second point I've made is that memory is fundamentally unreliable as a means for understanding ourselves and our lives, because the present moment is all there really is. This brings me to the last topic I wanted to touch on, which is the complex emotions associated with specific memories. While memory is ultimately unreliable for defining ourselves and our lives, there can be quite a range of complex emotions associated with our memories, and these emotional memories can be very instructive. At least in my experience, I've learned a lot about myself by exploring memories that are very emotional. This does not mean that you should define yourself by a memory, but that there can be a valuable insight in interpreting particular memories. Now, this is pretty commonly known in psychology. It comes up in therapeutic contexts as this idea of repressed memories. There are memories that we actively set aside and don't want to think about because they make us feel so unpleasant. These memories destabilize us and make it hard to be functional in the present moment. Sometimes they make it hard to smile. Sometimes they make it hard to actually want to live even. Now, if a memory is emotional, then there's a reason it's emotional. And the reason it's causing emotions for you is often something you don't know about, something you don't understand. The irony here is that we often try to define ourselves by the memories we can easily access, but the difficult repressed memories we simply avoid, even though they can be so insightful. Once again, I want to make it clear that defining oneself by a memory is an oversimplification and often an unhealthy practice. However, the reason that a memory is emotional can be insightful in itself. We can learn about ourselves and how to be healthier going forward by exploring that reason, rather than defining ourselves by any memories at all. I have 2 examples that I recently thought of for my own life, and when I consider these personal memories, this highly complex range of emotions arises. I wish I could give the emotional response one word, but I can't because it's a combination of 6 or 7 different emotions, and they all just arise from one thought, one recollection. I want to take a moment here to openly explore these memories and see what kinds of insights might be taken from them. So the first memory that makes me emotional is as follows. I remember throwing a sandwich in the garbage that my mom made for me for lunch. She made me a cheese and butter sandwich, which is a very simple sandwich, and I remember my teacher seeing me throw the sandwich out. And I threw it in the garbage casually because I'd been doing this for years. Almost every day, I'd throw out the sandwich. My teacher saw and said, "Did you just throw out that sandwich?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was a little bit surprised that she was so surprised. But looking back, it makes perfect sense that she was surprised. She asked me then, "Why?" And I said, "I don't like it." And she said, "Why don't you bring it back home?" And I said, "Well, when I do that, my mom gets mad at me." And then the teacher said, "Why don't you just tell her you don't like it?" And I said, "Well, I have." And she just says, "You eat what I make you." To be clear, I was a difficult child and an extremely picky eater, and I complained about a lot of things. Of course, my mom wasn't a perfect mom in that particular situation, perhaps, and I also wasn't a perfect child. But this memory brings up this deeply strange sadness in me. This sadness seems to be composed of a collection of smaller emotions: love and admiration, shame and embarrassment, regret, fear, empathy. First and foremost, my mom really tried. Even though she was a deeply flawed person, she still tried and made all of those things for me, and that effort is so much more important than how good the sandwiches were. And looking back now, I also feel ashamed and embarrassed that I threw those sandwiches out, that I didn't appreciate them. Another layer here is that my mom might even be embarrassed if she recalled these times. But she still tried so hard to make me happy and healthy. She put so much effort in and sacrificed so much for me. So amid any weaknesses of hers, which we all have plenty of weaknesses, I'm still so grateful. And I don't care at all about her weaknesses. In fact, I love my mom's weaknesses. Those are the things that one misses about a person when they're gone. So when I reflect on this memory, I see mom as this flawed, human person, and I feel ashamed for not appreciating the things she made for me as a child. And I love her so much. I would eat 1,000,000 cheese and butter sandwiches to show her how much I love her if she didn't understand. And I would enjoy the hell out of them, even though they're not my favorite sandwiches. One day she will pass away, and I will miss those sandwiches. I will want her to make me one of those very sandwiches. I don't want her to make a perfect restaurant-level, delicious, legendary sandwich, because that's just boring and perfect. That's not mom's sandwich. And when she passes away, I would be willing to go back and eat all of those discarded sandwiches again, just to have her back for even one moment. The second memory is kind of similar, and I think it leads to the same lesson, but it regards my dad. In this memory, my dad is dropping me off at the daycare center that I went to when I was about 4 or 5 years old. As he was dropping me off, he seemed to be in a deeply sad mood. Of course, I have no idea why he was sad, and it was probably not something he could talk to me about at the time, because I was a toddler and didn't understand much of anything. I can guess now in hindsight, maybe he was stressed about things at work and didn't want to go in that day. Maybe this was around the time one of my grandparents was falling ill. Maybe he just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I could just tell that he wasn't feeling great as I simply observed his expression and demeanor. As he left me at daycare, I hugged him and watched him walk away. As I entered the classroom, I couldn't shake the feeling and image, and I was trying to draw or paint during class, and I was trying really hard not to cry while painting. Because all the kids seemed to be enjoying themselves, and usually I liked drawing and painting, but the image of my dad walking away kept recurring in my mind, and then I just started crying. It's interesting because this is a memory of a memory. At this point, I'm remembering myself in the preschool classroom crying as I was remembering the image of my father walking away. Anyway, the teacher approached me and repeatedly asked why I was crying, and I just didn't know how to explain it. I simply did not have the language or comprehension to express my feelings. But I can understand it now in hindsight. I simply witnessed my father's sadness in a deep way. But what is the point of this reflection? Well, I started this off suggesting that there can be valuable insights from exploring emotional memories. And once again, just like in the first memory, this one invokes a deep feeling of love, empathy, and humanity. These memories help me remember that my mom and dad are complex human beings who sometimes suffer. They're just people trying to figure life out. We often hold our parents to impossible standards, and we're so critical of their flaws. We're often upset with them for not being better versions of themselves. This feeling is so common: frustration and exasperation with our parents' flaws, particularly when they're hurtful or making mistakes. But they're just people. My mom and dad have done so much for me, even though they've also made mistakes. Every parent will make mistakes. There's going to be this mixed bag of complicated effects on every child, and many will be caused by the parent's own flaws. We receive many of our flaws from our parents, whether it's the same ones or different ones. But the point is, our parents are human beings, and they deserve love and compassion like everybody else does. If you have parents who did anything good for you, it's worth forgiving them for their mistakes. It's worth appreciating every single little effort they've made for you. Every cheese and butter sandwich they made. Every time they dropped you off at preschool, every day they went to go work a long, hard day by themselves to pay the bills and support you while you grew up. This doesn't mean forgetting the mistakes or pretending they never happened or faking appreciation. This means simply recognizing their complex human nature. This can lead you to feel much more at peace with your past and more positive in the present. It can be easier to be affectionate and loving toward your family if you go through these reflections and recognize their underlying truths. From these memories, I feel more motivated to be affectionate and loving to my parents right now. It won't necessarily become easier to be consistently loving, but I understand my parents more deeply at this point, and I want to tell them I love them. And in case either of you is listening right now, I love you both so much. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad. And thank you for everything. Okay, so that's me being really vulnerable for a second here, and just demonstrating what the process can be like to explore your difficult memories. So I hope this recording helped you in some way to explore memory and let go of the attachments and gain the insights that they can often offer. I know with certainty that I'm happier and healthier since taking time with these reflections. They've been difficult and there have been downs and ups, but in general, I feel more at ease with the fragility of my memory, and I feel more grateful upon reflecting on difficult memories that were challenging times, but they invite a more positive approach moving forward, either towards specific people or towards specific situations. And as always, thanks so much for listening and have a great day.